Greetings from Ithaca, New York, home of Cornell University. My name is Victor Younger, Director of Diversity Inclusion here at the School of Hotel Administration. I'm so glad you've joined us for this great hour of programming we put together. First and foremost, I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Jen Micah, for assembling this wonderful panel for this great conversation today. Also, we really want to encourage everyone to please submit any questions in the chat that you may have. And as we jump into this conversation, but first we're going to start with simply asking our wonderful panelists to just share their information. But the name of the topic today is the business advantage of DEI across industry, trends, impacts, and best practices. And with that said, Ashley, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ashley Higgins-Dyke. I graduated Dyson in 2006, and I currently serve as the head of strategy and chief of staff to our CEO at Gannett, a large media company.
Welcome. Cliff?
Hi, everyone. Cliff Christoph, class of 2002, Senior Director of Human Resources and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with NBC Universal.
Welcome. Kate?
Hi, everyone. Kate Nadolny, Dyson 2006, CEO of Bandier.
Welcome. Tobias?
Greetings. My name is Tobias Sproul, class of 2005, Senior Managing Counsel and Head of North American Employment Law and Employee Benefits at LinkedIn Corporation.
Welcome. And Jerry?
Hi, good morning. Jerry Goldman, Arts and Sciences, class of 1972, retired partner from Ernst & Young, and currently serve as co-chair of the Randall's Island Park Alliance in New York City.
Welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for taking time to be a part of this wonderful conversation today. So let's jump right to it. So let's just talk a little bit about how are you seeing your company, firm, industry leverage DEI to drive innovation and produce better results? Anyone feel free to jump right in.
All right, I'll start.
Go ahead, Cliff.
So at our company, there's a belief that diverse, equitable, and inclusive company is a more effective company. And so the way that they have designed it is to have a DEI function that's both centralized in that there's a core office with the chief diversity officer, but it's also decentralized in that every business unit has a DEI person, employee, or teams that are built into the business line. So they have 1 foot in the DEI space and 1 foot in the business line to sort of better align themselves to DEI initiatives with the actual work that they're doing. Like most companies as well, we have employee resource groups, or ERGs. I think at last count, we had about 9 of them. And while it's 9 different groups, geographically, we have local chapters that feed into the big chapters as well. So New York City will have one, LA will have one, London will have one as well. We've had a couple of Meet the Moment speaker series, which is an initiative that's designed to challenge, inspire, and drive change and create a lasting and meaningful change in terms of things like intersectionality, committing to acts of inclusion, coming together, connecting, collaborating. And matter of fact, we have the next one coming up in a few weeks. They started right after George Floyd and have continued since then. And like most companies, there are a bunch of DEI initiatives like writers programs, directors initiatives, composers initiative, talent labs, which are designed to give the people who are currently within the company educations and experiences and exposure to move to different areas. Because I think one of the challenges that most companies have is with the retention of diverse talent, and it's doing things to try to encourage folks to stay on and to stay committed.
Cliff, thanks for kicking that off. I'm going to ask Ashley if you could just add to that, please.
Yeah, sure. So Gannett is the largest owner of newspapers in the country. And so we feel as though our product has to reflect the communities we serve. And so several years ago, we made a commitment not only to have a diverse workforce here at the company, but to actually look to mirror what each of the communities we serve. So each newsroom serving each of the 250 plus communities will look to mirror that of the community they serve by 2025. And we report out annually on that progress and biannually for the company. Because truthfully, if we can't reflect and serve and produce what each community is looking to hear from a news outlet, then we're not fulfilling our job, and we're certainly not going to be successful from a productivity and profitability perspective. And so I think that really has been the center of what we do. And from there, to Cliff's point, we have really extensive inclusion efforts here at the company that go through everything from employee resource groups to formalized training for all employees to hiring practices. But ultimately, for us, we feel it's foundational and core to what we offer as a product. And I think that sort of mission-based focus is also what helps us to retain and attract diverse talent. So to us, it really is a bit of a flywheel and what we believe will allow us to be successful as a company.
Awesome, Ashley. So Tobias.
Just to plus one the points that Ashley and Cliff made, LinkedIn is in a bit of a unique position because LinkedIn is a talent solutions company. So it is something that we not only believe internally, but it's core to what we do and what we bring to the marketplace. And so LinkedIn truly does value diversity. We have employee resource groups. We partner externally with key strategic partners, and we really do try to create an environment of belonging. We have some really cool, unique programs in addition to employee resource groups that target particular groups. And thinking about growth and development, to Cliff's point, retention is something that many companies, including LinkedIn, are striving to achieve. And we have mentorship circles. We have targeted programs for particular populations to help grow, for particular populations to help grow and develop those populations with an idea towards retention. And we are a thought leader in this space, again, both for internal purposes and for external purposes.
Excellent, Tobias. Kate.
Thank you, Victor. Much like what Ashley said, the fashion industry in general is not the most, I would say, inclusive and has historically not done enough in the space to really be able to reach their consumers and understand the needs of their consumers. So one of the things we've done at Bandier is really make sure that we, as a staff, can understand the expectations of the consumer, can live and breathe how the consumer is utilizing our product. And without that inclusivity and that diversity in our business plan and in our everyday work, we're unable to execute that for the marketplace. So I think we're trying to do our part as one brand, but one of the things that I've been quite vocal about and very involved in is how do we shift the entire fashion industry to be one that is really for all and not just for a subset of the population, especially in the US.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Jerry.
Yeah, I'm going to speak for a second to the not-for-profit world where Randall's Island sits in this discussion, and make the point that, well, Randall's Island is for those of you who aren't from New York City, is one of the largest municipal private-public partnerships in the United States. We are situated in the middle of the East River, bordering East Harlem and the South Bronx. And so DEI has been a very major focus for us, but not only from the standpoint of our employees and our board, but also from the standpoint of embracing the surrounding communities. So that we've undergone a significant amount of training, awareness training, mentoring, recruiting, employment work, and the like. But interestingly enough, we've done a lot of outreach to the community, a very diverse community, I might add. The upscale Upper East Side of New York is bordered by the underserved areas of East Harlem, and all of those populations use our park in a very, very large way. So whether we're doing sports programming or big concerts or art exhibits, the island has a very diverse population that we're trying to attract. And sensitivity to the issues of diversity and inclusiveness are critical of all the people that are associated with our organization. So, whether our employees work on the turf and make the baseball fields look beautiful, or they're involved with setting up arrangements with large organizations to come and celebrate on the island, we've really paid a lot of attention to recruiting the best and the brightest from all that America has to offer.
Yeah, that's awesome, Jerry. So there's a question that popped in from the audience, but I want to preference a couple of things. Cliff started off our conversation and he mentioned clearly the murder of George Floyd was a tipping point moment in our country. And it started what we saw, this movement. And to some degree, we can consider some of this to have been performative in terms of how companies responded to it. So I preference that statement performative. I'm hearing what you're saying, that you have embedded and weaved into your particular companies, which will lead to this question that I'm going to ask from the audience. So how do you make the business case for investing in D&I? Like many companies, our D&I programs really picked up in 2020, but have been built on the volunteer labor of diverse folks who are losing the momentum and energy to carry this effort without investment in people and programs. So how would someone like to respond to that question? I think it's great getting into the nuts and bolts of how we dig deeper into these conversations.
I'm happy to start at least. I do think it's probably very different for a company the size of Gannett with about 14,000 employees than a much smaller company. But I think clearly we have had a dedicated inclusion officer, a centralized unit, and small staff that supports the efforts here because there is quite a bit, even if you just consider the administrative effort of communicating and messaging to that many employees and making sure the programs and the efforts we're putting forth are well known. So, for us, thankfully, I think we were probably a bit ahead of the curve from many of our peers in the industry. And this is something that the company's been invested in for nearly a decade. And that support for us as a public company started at our board level and has been something that, the benefit of having a diverse board, also, reminding you of the perspectives to maintain and the way that you should be allocating capital, because we do believe that it creates a return and profitability for shareholders for us to have the most inclusive and diverse workforce we can. But for us, it does stem from actually putting a dollar investment against a centralized team that ensures that we have that consistency, planning, and effort that can then be, certainly leveraged by employee resource groups and volunteer talent, but that it's not solely relying on that.
Thank you. Excellent.
So I'll jump in as well. I'm sorry, Victor.
Go ahead.
So I think to make a business case, you have to literally make a business case, because most businesses exist for the purpose of making money. All businesses pretty much exist for the purpose of making money. And it's about presenting it in a way that helps them understand how much money they're leaving on the table, how much more money they can have, whether it's talking about the market share, the number of consumers that are in these diverse communities or with POCs. And the other big thing that I've seen that has helped is having a champion that's high up in the organization to help push that initiative as well. I have a couple of friends who got the DE&I role as an addition to the current job that they're doing. So they're in-house counsel, but they're also doing DEI, and it was sort of to check the box. And I have so much respect for the first of anything, but especially the first of a DEI position, because they have to really push the agenda as far as getting a budget, getting people to invest in them, getting people to collaborate with them, and getting this to be an important item on the agenda. So a champion has been critical to me and my efforts as well in terms of pushing it within my group in my company.
Thank you.
I'll just jump in super quickly to add to everything that's been shared. Plus one around there needing to be a business case. And yes, the numbers need to coincide with the why, right? Why is this important? I'll also add, and this is not to negate what I just said, but I'll also add that in addition to the business case and the numbers that follow, it's got to be because the company believes it's the right thing to do. I just don't want to sidestep that issue because at base, there needs to be an investment from an emotional kind of corporate good perspective that the company believes in DEI, the company believes it's the right thing to do. And yes, there is a business benefit that definitely needs to be teased out. In addition to that business benefit, though, again, the company has to believe it's the right thing to do. And that belief needs to start from the top down. The other thing that I'll say on a more practical level is that DEI work should be viewed as work, not free labor to be performed by select few who happen to be diverse. And so what that means is that companies need to think about ways to reward the labor. And by what I mean by reward, it's not just a special recognition, cash, stock, cash equivalent, right? There needs to be a tangible reward for the work that is being performed, which has a financial benefit for the company. And again, is just the right thing to do in my personal view.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it's important that we don't get siloed in what we should be doing as individual organizations, but again, more broadly reaching to what should entire industries be doing and what should communities be doing to engage as well. For a company to really be engaged and involved, they need to be connecting with that community in which they serve. So just building something, internally, I think doesn't address the overall issues and how they could be manifesting within a company when the community is not involved. And I think as the community gets involved, you start to get consumers and others really start to create that demand. And then you start to be able to fire some of that competition within different industries where it becomes part of the norm of what's expected versus a company, making a statement at a board meeting and pushing down an agenda. It becomes that groundswell if you connect authentically with that community and you build up that demand in the right way.
Yeah, awesome. In the spirit of answering, following another question that came from our audience, and I think we tapped into this, but I want to say the question out loud, and perhaps I think we've answered it. So the question from the audience was, in an extremely capitalistic industry, do you see the possibility for true equity and justice for marginalized communities, given that capitalism thrives on oppression? And so how can we disrupt norms to make this possible? I heard some comments intrinsically being very intentional, actually tying it into rewards. I mean, there are a lot of things that I heard you all provide as context that I think tapped into that. Anyone else like to add something specific to that hits that on target, if you will?
Yeah, I think we can use the capitalistic society that we live in to our benefit. If we create the business purpose, if we create the competition in such that other businesses will follow, you start to be able to create a wave of addressing it. It becomes something that, not only is there groundswell in demand for, but there's actually, again, clear business benefit to serving these communities as businesses. And all of a sudden, you as a business, as one business start to do that, you start to create that momentum. And then all of a sudden, all of the other businesses in the industry start to follow and realize that they're not servicing a community. So even though it may be not, driven from that same intrinsic intent of trying to do the right thing and trying to make sure that you're also capitalizing on the opportunity, that competitive spirit, I think, is something that exists in capitalism that can be utilized in this instance as well.
And I'll jump in there as a defender of capitalism as well, and just point out what I think is so obvious in these difficult times. Where are we seeing today the leadership in DEI? We're seeing it in big business. Now, whether it's selfish or not, whether it's only for the bottom line profit or not, the reality is the outspoken organizations that are going public with the need to address this issue is private enterprise, is American capitalism. The fact that government agencies, the fact that politicians are so silent on this issue to me is suggesting that maybe for the first time in 200 years, big business is leading the way on a social issue. So before we throw the dishwater out, be thankful for the little things we have. And if I can pontificate on one more thing before you go to the next question, I just caution everybody to, I want to go back to the tipping point comment. Because for somebody with 50 years experience in this thing, I will tell you that there have been so many tipping points in the last 50 years. And I venture to predict that the George Floyd tipping point will also become history. There will be another one after that. The reality is what's happening right now is DEI is becoming institutionalized within organizations. And everybody's comments before me are so relevant to the fact that once you have a director of DEI or a vice president of DEI, that's a position. It's not a person. So when that person moves on, the company's going to have to deal with, we've got an open position. Then the risk of getting rid of the position is too great politically for an organization to I believe, take on. So for the first time in my experience, we really see this issue becoming an institutional requirement of capitalistic organizations. Enough of my pontificating.
No, thank you for that, Jerry. I think research shows us that innovation happens when there's diversity of thought at the table. So from a capitalistic perspective, yeah, I would say that big businesses certainly understand that the more innovation you have, the more creativity you can provide. So there is an intrinsic value with that. I would then just ask the question still. Yes, George Floyd was a tipping point moment. What I am hopeful for is that we will not experience another one like that. Perhaps the next tipping point moment would be something that resembles more of how we have really moved the needle in a way that has now changed the landscape of how we look at D&I practices, but it's not predicated on a situation that percolated the change in our platform. To that end, there's a question that one of our viewers have added. Do each of your businesses include disability in your DEI efforts? And if so, would you please share a little about them?
At Gannett, it definitely does. We actually have been, we have a business called review.com that is where you can search for products, and we've product tested and can give you, what's the best toaster or vacuum, things of that nature. One of the big areas we pushed into, because we felt as though nobody was addressing it, was the accessibility space. And largely that was driven by one of our journalists, reporters, who has a disability and wanted to talk about the lack of reviews or product information around items that allow folks with disabilities to have easier accessibility. So, again, that's a perfect example of an area where we took the benefit of having a diverse workforce and have implemented it into a profit generating area of the company that's also continuing to meet the mission of serving the needs of the communities that read our products. So yes, certainly disability is a big part of what we consider part of our inclusion efforts.
Thank you, Ashley.
I will add that we do have an employee resource group, an ERG called My Abilities, that is geared towards that population as well. And honestly, it's something that I'm just getting exposed to and learning about myself. The only times that I have been exposed to it previously was when there was an issue on a set or at a location where there wasn't accessible resources or different facilities weren't accessible, and we had to remedy that situation immediately. So most companies, I think, are moving in that direction. And what I will also highlight is that no one is any one thing. And if you're in one ERG, it may benefit you to join multiple that have some relation or some impact on the work that you do or the people that you interact with. So My Abilities is one of the ones, because it's something that I need to learn and become more exposed to, that I have joined to sort of participate in the conversation and the happenings there.
Great. Thank you for that comment. Yes, Kate.
Yeah, so this is something that's definitely very near and dear to me. In a previous role, I was very closely connected to a group called Runway of Dreams, which actually looked at how fashion can become more accessible. 1 in 4 people either have or will experience for a length of time a disability. And being able to service that consumer is incredibly important, not just as an industry, but obviously, you know, as people in this world and as part of the community. So looking at that, I think, you know, making sure again that we're talking about what the consumer needs, how that consumer is also our employee, and how do we create programs and how do we create initiatives to serve them, I think is really important. And keeping in mind just, you know, everyday things that happen in your life and how easy sometimes you have it as an able-bodied person, and thinking about how you can help those who don't have that lack of friction in their life is really critical. So just have to give that plug to Runway of Dreams that really started momentum and started to actually push, again, an industry forward and have multiple apparel companies start to look at creating product and creating experiences for the disabled community.
Excellent.
And I'll just add that, just to echo the points, LinkedIn does have an employee resource group that's dedicated to people, that's focused on people with disabilities. It's called Enable In. Again, LinkedIn is a talent solutions company, so we kind of have this on our radar from both an internal and external perspective. You know, we're all about creating economic opportunity for all, and that does include people with disabilities. So big picture, within tech and more broadly, the focus needs to be on day zero, ground zero accessibility. Because if we can build technology in a way that allows for all to be able to access it, then we don't have to worry about making quote unquote special accommodations to the same extent that we currently do. And so tapping into the broader fabric of corporate social responsibility, to quickly double back to the prior question around capitalism and oppression and kind of the future state. Corporate social responsibility is an area, in my view, that dovetails quite nicely with DEI, right? Because now there are requests, sometimes demands from shareholders and pressure that's put on companies to quote unquote do the right thing. And that directly ties in to, again, shareholder investment, potential future customer acquisition, and this the general state of a healthy business. So corporate social responsibility, in my view, is an area that really dovetails nicely and with DEI because we're all working towards the greater good.
Wonderful. Any other comments before we move on to the next question? Great. I'm going to continue to select questions from the audience. And this is wonderful. Are you guys good? Where we good? I'll just keep going in that direction. Excellent. Excellent. Can you share any of the most compelling research or data that you have seen that demonstrates and quantify the value of DEI?
I think for me, it would be the studies we've run internally. So I'm sure that there's, you know, some great top line studies out there too, but to Cliff's earlier point of you needing to make the business case for your business and your industry, you know, our ability to poll employees and certainly employees leaving the company, we utilized a lot of that research to understand what they were looking for and what our culture was missing. Again, our company's been invested in this space for some time, but certainly the addition of something like our employee resource groups is something we've continued to expand upon year over year based on interest. Those are employee generated, employee led, and ultimately they're not solely around demographic choice and self-selection. So while we certainly have a very wide range of folks self-selecting into groups based on gender or ethnicity, minority constituencies, we also have them much more broadly around things like those committed to sustainability, one around mental health and wellness. And so, I think broadly that has allowed our employees to drive the directions we go and ensure that we're supporting them on the things that they care most about. And so we continue running quite a bit of research that's helping us to best support that direction. And what we've found is that it's meaningfully important to retention of employees. And we've been able to show improvement over time with retention, directly linking back to engagement of our ERGs.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, I don't like mentioning other institutions, but Harvard Business Review does a pretty good job of producing reports about different topics, and the papers that they have on the DEI space have been pretty good resources, well researched, and a lot of numbers and facts to back up the business case in a lot of instances for the DEI efforts and the DEI movement. The Conversation by Robert Livingston, I was looking on the back on my bookshelf to make sure I got it right. And shout out to Jen and her class, because I read that book because I was participating as an outside person with that class and digesting that book. But that was a wonderful resource for me as well, in terms of not only understanding the history behind it, the data points to prove it, and things that you could do moving forward, but he also had a lot of practical steps for how to move forward, depending on where your company is or depending on what your industry is. And I think, if I recall correctly, it also accounted for where you are in the company. So obviously, if you're CEO, you have a lot more sway and pull. But if you are lower in the organizational chart, you still have sway and pull. It's just about doing it in more of a organic or maybe a political perspective.
And I'll just jump in super quickly, +1 to what everybody said. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention that LinkedIn has a wealth of information as a professional network, both from LinkedIn and content developers, LinkedIn Premium, non-premium, around the business case for diversity. So it's something that we live and breathe and appreciate. But again, LinkedIn has a wealth of knowledge around data studies, articles that support the business case for DEI.
And I don't know if other companies doing this as well, and to shout out LinkedIn, but LinkedIn Learning also is something that a resource that NBCU provides to its employees. And there are videos and courses that you can take and even get certificated for, that can in the DEI space and in multiple spaces that can add to your experience, but also add to your attractiveness as a candidate.
Awesome. So, well, go to another question. So from one of our viewers, what is the team's advice on changing the mindset of the head of HR of a mid-sized company who believes that the creation of ERGs will drive a divide amongst employees, white versus underrepresented?
I'll jump in first, and I'll say that ERGs are intended to bring people together. Not acknowledging diversity or difference does not negate the diversity or difference or automatically create unity. And so there needs to be a discussion with the right people, typically senior, ultimately people, and you may need to navigate your way up, start maybe at the middle ranks and work up to gather support, right? But ultimately there needs to be senior level support for the creation of ERGs. Now, how you execute it is going to be around inclusion, right? That is the key hallmark, inclusion. I'll also say, as I look at the parenthetical white versus underrepresented, I just want to call out to another question in the chat, and as we talked about previously, there are multiple facets of diversity, right? It could relate to race, right? It could relate to gender, in which case you could have white women be included. It could relate to disability, in which case you could have white men be included. And I'll also caveat the call out that ERGs are not necessarily intended, right? And I'll take up the necessarily, right? Are not intended to be exclusive, right? Anybody can be a part of an ERG, notwithstanding their background. So I, as a man, can be a part of an ERG that supports women, right? Again, the idea is to be inclusive. The idea is to gather champions, not to divide. And so addressing that mental model head on in a way that is tactical and intangible is going to be key. Those are the initial thoughts that came to mind, but I want to leave space for others on the panel to contribute to the question.
If I could add to that, I don't like using the term benchmarking, but benchmarking may be a good resource for you here, where if your competitors are doing this, or if this is the way the industry is moving, that could give some level of incentive for the company to investigate it themselves, or at least an external source of pressure, if applied properly, for that person to also move in that direction.
Look, I think somebody said very early on that if the senior management isn't behind this thing, a middle manager, HR person is going to have a very hard time moving the needle. So to me, this is the crisis America faces right now in our inability to have safe conversations with people who disagree with each other. It's sort of like we're not allowed to do that anymore, and therefore too many people don't try. I think that if I were to be in that situation, I would probably try to encourage some grassroots conversations and let it percolate a little bit upstream, as opposed to trying to go to somebody who's absolutely against the concept. And then I think we're in a unique situation where people can vote with their feet. If you're in an organization that is not embracing the issues we're talking about today, if you can't execute change, then move on. You know, there's a lot of opportunity out there for smart people, and the brain drain in and of itself will cause people to wake up. So there are many ways of trying to deal with the issue, but sitting back and doing nothing is not going to change things.
Jerry, may I ask you a question to that?
Sure.
Because one of the spaces I think there is for opportunity is with that exit interview and being honest about why you're leaving. And I find that people aren't often honest. So can you tell us something or share what the benefit would be of being honest in the exit interview about all the reasons you're leaving?
Well, you know, nobody wants to get in trouble, and nobody wants to ruin their resume, and everybody wants to get a recommendation. But again, I come back to, this is such an important time to have constructive conversations. And if you're leaving an organization because you're not comfortable with the social environment or the direction that the company is going as it relates to the community, clients, and other employees, I think you need to say it. And again, I say it in a constructive way. You know, you guys are losing good talent. We understand this market. You're not reaching into the breadth of experience that part of your population has. There's so many ways of broaching a conversation without saying, "Boy, you're stupid," and And boy, this is a horrible place. But it's not a place that works for me. And these are the reasons why. That's the best I can come up with off the top of my head.
It's awesome. Thank you for that. So I love the fact that we're touching on, different identities that typically may not always have front of mind, particularly ability. And then another question came into the audience regarding neurodivergent. So what strategies do you have of inclusion of neurodivergent people? Anyone would like to have that conversation?
I think we learned a lot about neurodivergency, about how people work differently over the course of COVID. And I think this is really a moment as organizations for us to take a step back and say, some of my best employees actually work better at home. Why? It's not about not wanting to be a part of the team. It may be about other things that are happening that make them more successful in different circumstances. So I think it's important that we take all of those different learnings and think through how we can accommodate those, not just because it's the right thing to do again, but it's how we get the best out of those individuals as employees by making some of those accommodations that truly are within our grasp. Perhaps they didn't feel like they were 3 years ago, but now they are. And I think, I use working from home as an example because I do think it's a clear one. And I think I've had a lot of employees and peers have this conversation about, gee, so-and-so was so much better at home, doesn't want to come back into the office. I don't understand why. And it's, well, because you gave them that safe space for being able to work differently within the confines of what works for them. So I think we need to just kind of evaluate the successes that came out of, the last few years as well.
Just a plus one, the point that Kate made, the pandemic has caused us to reevaluate how we structure work, both working at home and even office arrangements, right? Are there places in the office where people can come together? Are there places in the office where people can work separately? From a legal perspective, folks with neurodivergent disabilities or needs, the evaluation is very much a case-by-case basis, right? And so as a general matter, there are things that can be done at an institutional level, but when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, it's going to be up to every organization to engage in what is called the interactive process and really work in good faith to reach an accommodation that works well for both the employee and the employer. And that is a difficult thing to quote unquote solve for at scale, but that is what it requires. And again, there are things that organizations can do at an institutional level, but what it's going to require, in my view, is a commitment, again, to engage in that interactive process in good faith, making sure they have the right professionals in HR, the right resources from an accommodation perspective, right? And the bandwidth to make sure that each individual request is treated with the care that it deserves.
Mm. Well said. Well said. Okay, we have another question I'd like to pose to the group. How do you engage and educate people at all levels to promote understanding so that everyone can be a champion and drive DEI? As you well know, we have DEI officers, as we talked about, vice presidents, directors, and oftentimes many of the scenarios are often seen, we have now this position, but then how impactful is it? And is it left up to that individual and or how they structure them? So how do we think about this question of calling everybody in to understand that they are part of the solution as we think strategically about DEI practices?
Well, at Randall's Island, we actually hired a consultant. I mean, we have 120 employees, and she broke us down into various and sundry groups and ran what she called smash up sessions, which was a new phrase for me. But basically they were, and of course, everything was on Zoom the last 2 or 3 years, but basically they were creating a safe space where we're going to talk these issues out and we're going to, really sensitize, I think is the word I'm looking for, sensitize people as to what we're talking about. It's amazing how many people really don't even understand their biases or their issues. Again, until you actually put words in out in the open. So so there's a lot of my comment is that there's a lot of education that needs to be done and needs to be done proactively.
Mm. Anyone else like to add to that question?
I'll just add money helps. This is not something that is necessarily done for free, so to speak. Whether you're talking about external consultants, whether you're talking about programming, resourcing, having a budget helps, right? Are these items included on individuals' goals at the end of the year, right? And again, how are they being rewarded, right? For those who do go above and beyond on top of their day job, because I doubt that some of this work was actually included in the job description for the jobs which they applied, right? Are they being rewarded in the financial sense for doing this awesome work, right? Which again, does have a financial benefit to the company. So in one word, money.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, money is essential, I think, to any, particularly in this work, because it really speaks to the value that it carries within the organization. One of the things that I've been hearing in the conversation as we're thinking about ERG organizations and creating spaces, what we call safe spaces. But when we say that word safe space and we're in a working environment, how safe is a space? How do you know that that space is safe to have these very important and sometimes very challenging conversations that really require people to lean in, suspend their judgment, remove their defense mechanisms, and be good listeners? How do we create that space? And any examples of that you have experienced and or have worked through?
Well, one of the ways that I would say is with intentional leadership, deliberate leadership, where you are modeling the behavior that you want to seek. And when I was leading my team, one of the things that I did in my one-on-ones was have two conversations with them. I had the corporate conversation with them and would deliberately transition to, all right, here's what I'm telling you as a person. And sometimes my guidance as a person and as a friend would be a little bit different or a little bit modified. So for example, when it comes to something like your start date, when we're recruiting and somebody's starting and the company wants you to start as soon as possible, 2 weeks notice is what you need, give them 2 weeks and start that Monday. And as a person who has spent most of my career ending one job on Friday and starting another one on Monday, and after the pandemic and learning a little bit more about mental health and space, you need that break to sort of mourn the old position and start the other one. So the advice that I would give the folks that were that eventually joined my team was, look, we want you to start in 2 weeks, but personally, you need to take some more time just so you can reset and be ready to start this new position fresh and not feel like you just had 48 hours to turn around and get back on the road again to start another journey that'll last, who knows how long.
Yeah.
As an employment attorney, I just want to jump in and say that for me, words matter. So when I hear safe space in the workplace, I want to caveat that by saying that we're all still at work, right? And off the record conversations, safe conversations, I want to center them. My view is to center them in appropriateness, right? And so even in a quote unquote safe space, right, work conduct needs to be appropriate, right? And what that means may require a conversation, if there are questions, right, with HR, right, about kind of what do the boundaries look like. My view is that conversations should be kicked off with what I like to call expectations, formerly known as ground rules, house rules, because people do need to understand that there are boundaries. Right, you just can't say anything you want in the workplace under the cover of, well, I thought it was a safe conversation. I was just saying what was on my mind. There are rules. There are real rules and real consequences. And so when we use that term, quote unquote, safe space, we all need to be on the same page about what that means. And again, appropriateness, time, manner, and place, appropriateness is the golden rule, in my view.
Excellent advice. Excellent.
Well, I mean, our employment attorney here just made me really nervous in saying that. So, I want to jump in, but now I'm not in a safe space. I don't know, it's bias. No, so I would say, kind of taking a step back on that, going back to what we were talking about, one of the last questions is the human element, right? And I think if we create a safe space by bringing in a little bit of our humanity in an appropriate manner, I think that that's really key. And one of the things that I've always kind of seen is, again, the workload and the need to bring light to a situation usually falls on the people being most impacted on it. So the best way that I've been able to create a safe space is to have conversations as somebody who's not a part of that group, to say, hey, I'm recognizing this as an outsider, and I want to let you know I see it. And it's a good time where there's a good place, there's an open door policy to have conversations. I think it's very hard to continue to put the onus on the backs of the group being impacted in certain situations instead of reaching out and being an ally.
Yeah. Yeah, that word ally is so important when we're thinking about having others that are stepping in on your behalf, or that advocate when you're not there. They're speaking out for you, at least identifying issues when you're not at the table. One of the things I wanted to ask is that perhaps when you walk into a space, what are you finding in terms of cultural nuances? What I mean by that is visual presentation. When people are bringing their cultural perspective into the workspace, whether you can see it visibly, or whether you can see it from a non-prescriptive way, is just a cultural thing that they're bringing to the workspace. How have we adapted to understanding that we want to create those inclusive spaces visibly and culturally for employees to bring their full self to the work experience?
I think the pandemic has forced companies to be more intentional about the spaces that they create and making it more open and more welcoming. So I've spoken to countless employees who said, if I'm going to come to work, I'm going to come into work comfortable. And so it's more of a colorful office where the New York City gray, blue attire has almost disappeared, at least at NBC. And people are more casual. So it's like casual Friday is every day in the office in terms of how people are appearing and presenting themselves. In terms of the space, the spaces are being reimagined for less desks and corner offices and assigned locations, and to more of the open space format where you sign up and you can, if you want to be on a different floor that day, you can reserve the space, reserve a room, and your whole team could be there together with you, as opposed to being confined to one particular location. And so from that perspective, I find that I don't live in the office as much as I used to. And it's more so a place that I come to collaborate and to connect, more so than I come to work. So my office days are more designed towards in-person meetings and interactions. And that also is a comment on the return to office and some of the challenges that we're facing, all companies are facing, I believe, in terms of luring people back into the office space.
Thank you, Cliff. We have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to take this opportunity to ask this final question, and we'd love to hear from everyone. Knowing of this conversation we've had, which has been extremely fruitful, very informative, thinking about the topic, the business advantage of D&I across industries, trends, impacts, and best practices. What would be something that you want to leave with the audience from your perspective, thinking about this conversation that we had today as a takeaway? And we'll just try to get a viewpoint from everyone. Thanks, Ashley.
Sure, I'll start really briefly. I think there also maybe was a question around this, but to me, I would second something I think Tobias said earlier, which is you do need to get buy-in from leadership. There does need to be somebody who is going to help championing this to the highest levels and to the board of directors. And I think to some extent, there's a groundswell for that support coming from the shareholder community and investment community, but that won't be enough. And so figuring out who those people can be and how to best leverage them, I think will sort of set you up for success.
Thank you, Ashley. Kate?
No, I would say really listen to your consumers and listen to your community. And if you're not impacting change that they can feel in your product and your services, then you're obviously not doing the job you should be doing within your own four walls in your own company as well. So I think it starts with, what your mission is. And if your mission is to create a great product, great service for a particular consumer group, then keep taking that all the way through. Obviously, DE&I becomes a huge part of building that strategy. And thinking about that in everything you do.
Thank you, Kate. Jerry?
Speaking from the perspective this time of the organization, I would say that actions sometimes speak louder than words, and only by recruiting people of all backgrounds, promoting people of all backgrounds, giving responsibility to people of all backgrounds, and celebrating the success of people of all backgrounds is the way that you show the whole organization you're serious about these things, and that in fact makes for a better place.
Thank you, Jerry. Cliff?
If I could switch the lens for a second and focus on the person that is doing this work, more so than the business, I will say that stress is a real thing. So stress management is of critical importance. Mental health is a real thing. So pursuing things that address your mental health is of critical importance as well. This is actually reminding me that I need to find a new therapist. But you have to balance your self-advocacy and the work you do with self-care, because this is the kind of work or the kind of effort that, especially if you're meeting resistance, will weigh on you and will impact you. So you have to find your own outlets and resources to be able to approach this work joyfully, with energy, and making sure you find an opportunity to rest and to put the stuff down, put the burdens of the company and the world down to just take care of yourself.
Thank you for that, Cliff. And Tobias?
I'll be brief, and I'll just say, be inspired to create an impact, a meaningful impact, whatever that may be, right? It could be opening up a diversity internship program or mentoring somebody of a diverse background. It could be, as Jerry said, by your exit, right? If you exit and you're in your exit interview in an appropriate way, of course, share your grievances. That could be a way to create impact. So just think and look around you. Is it that opportunity in the elevator that you have with the senior executive to quickly mention something about diversity and maybe try to get some time on his or her calendar, right? Thinking about ways that we can create impact, being inspired to create impact. Language on a Zoom call, somebody uses an incorrect pronoun and you follow up with them, or you mention that to HR, right? And maybe create a space for others to feel more included. So just thinking about ways, whether they be quote unquote little, because there really is no little impact in my view, right? But whether they be quote unquote little or large, be inspired to create impact and search. You have to search and think about these things. Because when you think about things, right, there's a higher likelihood of it becoming a reality. So be inspired to create meaningful impact.
Wow. Thank you for those encouraging words, Tobias. On that note, we have so many questions that we could continue with this conversation, but on behalf of Dr. Jen Micah and our diversity team and the panelists, thank you guys for taking time to have this conversation. These conversations are meaningful. I know people are walking away with some insight, and we are going to continue to push this needle and have these conversations, because it is what makes us a better human being to one another. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the audience for queuing in, and have a wonderful day.